Sometimes the most powerful acts of love are those done in secret. When Ethan Rhodes unexpectedly spotted his ex-wife struggling to make ends meet, something inside him broke. But pride can be a dangerous thing when two hearts still beat for each other. The question wasn't whether he would help her, but whether she would ever discover the truth behind her sudden streak of good luck. From his sleek corner office on the 47th floor of the Rhodes Enterprises headquarters, Ethan Rhodes surveyed the Manhattan skyline with the detached interest of a man who owned several of the buildings within his view. At 42, he had achieved everything society deemed important: wealth beyond imagination, power that made politicians nervously return his calls, and a reputation as one of the most ruthlessly effective business minds of his generation. The financial magazines loved to speculate about his net worth, usually settling on estimates north of $11 billion, though Ethan himself had stopped counting years ago. What was the point? Money had become merely a way of keeping score, in a game he had already won. His assistant, Marcus, cleared his throat discreetly at the doorway. "Your 3 o'clock meeting with the Saudi investors has been moved to tomorrow morning. They had some travel complications. Also, Mr. Tanaka from Tokyo confirmed the acquisition terms, so legal is drawing up the final paperwork." Marcus hesitated, which was unusual for his normally efficient assistant. "And there's one more thing. That charity event you asked me to monitor, the one at the community center in Brooklyn, I've confirmed that Ms. Winters will be there. Apparently she's working as their new development coordinator, started about 3 months ago." Ethan's hand tightened imperceptibly around his coffee mug. Claire Winters, his ex-wife, the only person who had ever seen past his carefully constructed walls. The woman whose absence still felt like a phantom limb 5 years after their divorce. "Thank you, Marcus. That will be all," he replied, his voice betraying none of the sudden tension radiating through his body. When Marcus left, Ethan sank into his Italian leather chair and pulled up an unmarked folder on his computer. It contained everything his private investigator had uncovered about Claire's life since their separation. The information was sparse, not because his investigator wasn't thorough, but because Claire's life had become remarkably ordinary after leaving him. After their divorce, she had refused the generous settlement he had offered, taking only what she had brought into the marriage: pride. It had always been her defining characteristic, the thing he had simultaneously loved and found maddening about her. According to the investigator's report, Claire had been laid off from her marketing job during the recent economic downturn. She'd been struggling to find steady work for months before landing this position at the community center, a job that likely paid a fraction of what she was worth. The report included a photograph taken just weeks ago. Claire exiting a rundown apartment building in Brooklyn, looking thinner than he remembered, dark circles under her eyes, but still carrying herself with that unmistakable dignity that had first drawn him to her 7 years ago. The sight of that photograph had stirred something in Ethan that he thought he had successfully buried, a mixture of concern, guilt, and an emotion he refused to name. Claire would never accept his help directly. Their divorce hadn't been ugly, merely quiet and final, both of them too stubborn to bridge the fundamental differences that had torn them apart. Her last words to him still echoed in his mind. "I never wanted your money, Ethan. I wanted a partner, not a provider." He closed the file and gazed out at the darkening sky. The charity event was in 2 days. After 5 years of carefully avoiding any contact with Claire, he was deliberately putting himself in her path. Though what he would say to her, or if he would say anything at all, remained unclear even to himself. Claire Winters hurried through the Brooklyn Community Center, clipboard in hand, mentally checking off last-minute details for the fundraiser. "Samira, have the extra folding chairs arrived yet?" she called to her young assistant, who was struggling with a box of decorations. "They're being unloaded now." "But the caterer just called saying they're running 30 minutes behind," Samira replied, blowing a strand of hair from her face. Claire suppressed a sigh. "Of course they are." When aren't they? She glanced at her watch, a simple timepiece that replaced the diamond-encrusted Cartier that now sat in a safety deposit box, a relic from another life. I'll head downstairs to help with the chairs. Can you follow up with the sound system guy? He was supposed to be here an hour ago. As Claire navigated through the bustling community center, she mentally calculated their fundraising targets. The center needed at least $200,000 to keep its after-school programs running through the next year. In her 3 months working here, she'd come to understand how vital these programs were to working families in the neighborhood. Tonight's event needed to be perfect if they had any hope of reaching wealthy donors. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. Reminder: rent increase effective next month. New rate $18.50 month. Claire closed her eyes momentarily. That was a $300 increase. She couldn't afford, not with her current salary. She would have to start apartment hunting again, something she had no time or energy for. She tucked the phone away and plastered on a smile as she pushed through the double doors to the loading area. Later that evening, as guests began arriving, in their expensive attire, Claire stood at the entrance, greeting donors with practiced charm. Her simple black dress, a holdover from her corporate days, was still elegant enough for the occasion, though she had mended a small tear near the hem just that morning. 5 years ago, she would have simply bought a new designer dress, without a second thought. But that had been in her previous life, when she was Mrs. Ethan Rhodes. The divorce had been her choice. She had walked away from a life of privilege because the gap between them had grown too wide to bridge. Ethan had become consumed by his empire building, transforming from the passionate, idealistic man she had fallen in love with into someone who measured everything, including their relationship, in terms of profit and loss. Their arguments had centered not on his long absences or workaholic tendencies, but on something more fundamental: his inability to see that she needed his presence more than his presence, his partnership more than his provision. Claire was so lost in thought that she almost missed him. The tall figure in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit standing just inside the entrance, surveying the room with those intense grey eyes she knew so well. Ethan. Her heart performed a painful somersault. In her chest, what was he doing here? The community center was hardly the type of venue that attracted billionaires. Before she could decide whether to approach him or flee in the opposite direction, the center's director, Harold, was already moving toward Ethan with the eager expression of a man who recognized money when he saw it. Claire hung back, watching their interaction with a strange detachment. Ethan smiled politely at whatever Harold was saying, but his eyes scanned the room until they landed squarely on her. For a moment, 5 years vanished, and she was transported back to the charity gala where they had first met, when he had looked at her with the same intensity across a crowded room. Claire forced herself to breathe normally as Harold enthusiastically led Ethan in her direction. "Claire, there you are. I'd like you to meet Mr. Rhodes. He's expressed interest in our after-school programs." Ethan extended his hand, his expression inscrutable. "Ms. Winters, a pleasure." Claire accepted his handshake, feeling an unwelcome jolt at the familiar touch. "Mr. Rhodes, this is unexpected." She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I've been diversifying my philanthropic portfolio," he replied smoothly. "Community education has become a particular interest of mine." Harold beamed, oblivious to the undercurrent between them. "Claire is our new development coordinator. She's been doing wonders with our outreach efforts." "Is that so?" Ethan's gaze never left her face. "Perhaps Ms. Winters could tell me more about your programs while we get a drink." Before Claire could formulate an excuse, Harold was already nodding enthusiastically. "Excellent idea. Claire, why don't you show Mr. Rhodes around? I need to greet the Wilsons anyway." And with that, he was gone, leaving Claire alone with the last person she had expected to see tonight. "You look well," Ethan said quietly, once Harold was out of earshot. Claire smoothed her dress self-consciously. "Thank you. You too." It was a ridiculous understatement. Ethan looked better than well. The years had only enhanced his appearance, adding distinguished touches of silver at his temples and deepening the character lines around his eyes. "Shall we?" He gestured toward the bar. Claire nodded stiffly, falling into step beside him. As they walked, she was acutely aware of the whispers and stares. Everyone knew who Ethan Rhodes was, and she could practically hear the speculation buzzing through the room. "I didn't know community centers in Brooklyn were on your radar," she said as they reached the bar. Ethan ordered them both drinks, champagne for himself and a gin and tonic for her. She was surprised he remembered her preference. "I've been reevaluating my priorities lately," he replied, handing her the drink. "Big tech and real estate developments have their place, but I've become interested in more direct impacts." Claire took a sip, studying him over the rim of her glass. Something felt off. Ethan Rhodes didn't just show up at small community fundraisers, even if he was reevaluating priorities. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. 3 months. "And before that?" Claire hesitated. "Various consulting jobs. The job market has been challenging." Ethan nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "I heard Archer Marketing had substantial layoffs. Wasn't that where you were working?" The fact that he knew where she had been employed made Claire uneasy. "Yes," she admitted. "I was caught in the last round of cuts. But I'm fine, Ethan. The community center may not pay what corporate America does, but the work is meaningful." "I never doubted your resilience," he replied. And for a moment, something genuine flickered in his eyes, something that resembled admiration. As they continued their awkward small talk, Claire tried to ignore the memories flooding back, of intimate dinners, heated arguments, passionate reconciliations, and ultimately, the quiet devastation of signing divorce papers in a sterile lawyer's office. What had started as a whirlwind romance between a rising tech entrepreneur and a marketing executive had ended with two people who couldn't find a way to grow together instead of apart. The fundraiser exceeded expectations, raising nearly $300,000 for the community center's programs. Claire should have been elated, but as she reviewed the donation list the following morning, her stomach tightened with suspicion. An anonymous donation of $150,000 had been made at the exact moment Ethan had stepped away to take an important call. The coincidence seemed too perfect. When she questioned Harold about it, he merely shrugged. "The donor requested anonymity, Claire. That's not unusual for large gifts. Let's just be grateful, shall we?" But gratitude was not what Claire felt as she rode the subway home that evening. If that donation had come from Ethan, it meant he had seen her struggle and responded with charity, the one thing she couldn't accept from him. Their relationship had fractured precisely because he believed every problem could be solved with money, while she had needed something much more valuable: his time, his partnership, his willingness to build a life together rather than simply finance one. Her small apartment felt particularly cramped that night as she kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the worn sofa. The rent increase notice glared at her from the coffee table. She would have to find a new place, probably further from work, with an even longer commute. Exhaustion washed over her at the thought. Her phone chimed with an email notification. It was from a property management company she didn't recognize, announcing a special promotion. "Selected residents in your building qualify for a rent stabilization program for the next 2 years, with no increases. Your unit has been selected based on length of tenancy and payment history. Please contact the office to confirm your participation." Claire frowned, reading the email twice. This made no sense. Her building wasn't the type to offer rent stabilization, and she had only lived there for 10 months, hardly a long-term tenant. Something felt suspicious, especially coming the day after she had unexpectedly reconnected with her billionaire ex-husband. "Ethan," she muttered, grabbing her laptop. A quick search revealed that the property management company had been acquired by a holding corporation just 3 weeks ago. Further digging showed the holding corporation was a subsidiary of another company, which eventually traced back to Rhodes Enterprises. Claire slammed her laptop shut, anger bubbling up. How dare he? First the donation, now this. She had made it abundantly clear when they divorced that she wanted nothing from him, certainly not his financial support. His inability to understand that money couldn't fix everything was precisely why their marriage had failed. She reached for her phone, tempted to call him and unleash 5 years of bottled frustration. But what would that accomplish? Ethan would simply deny involvement, or worse, justify his actions as simple kindness. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. If Ethan Rhodes thought he could swoop back into her life as some kind of secret benefactor, she would have to find a different way to respond. Over the next few weeks, Claire noticed a series of coincidences that became increasingly difficult to dismiss. First, the community center received a state-of-the-art computer lab, sponsored by an educational foundation, a foundation she later discovered was funded primarily by Rhodes Enterprises. Then, her application for a healthcare subsidy she didn't remember applying for was mysteriously approved. Finally, when her 10-year-old car broke down, the mechanic informed her that all repairs have been covered by your extended warranty, a warranty she definitely hadn't purchased. Each incident reinforced her suspicion that Ethan was orchestrating these fortunate events from behind the scenes. It was exactly his style, identifying problems and efficiently eliminating them, all without having to engage in the messy business of actual human connection. Claire found herself in an impossible position. She couldn't prove Ethan's involvement without confronting him, and she couldn't afford to refuse the help that was making her life significantly easier. The practical part of her acknowledged that these interventions had relieved enormous stress. She could keep her apartment, the community center was thriving, and her persistent anxiety about medical bills had eased. But her pride suffered with each new coincidence. One evening, after discovering that her student loans had been mysteriously paid off, another paper trail that eventually led back to a Rhodes Enterprises subsidiary, Claire made a decision. If Ethan wanted to play secret benefactor, she would let him, for now. But she would use his help to become truly self-sufficient, so that when she finally confronted him, she could do so from a position of strength, not vulnerability. She enrolled in a night program for non-profit management, determined to advance her career. She took on additional responsibilities at the community center, building a network of contacts that could lead to better opportunities. And she started a small side business offering marketing consultation to local businesses, rebuilding the expertise that had once made her one of the most sought-after marketing executives in New York. What Claire didn't know was that Ethan was watching her transformation with growing admiration. His initial impulse to simply eliminate her financial struggles had evolved into something more complex as he observed her response. Rather than becoming dependent on his anonymous assistance, she was using it as a foundation to rebuild on her own terms. It was a quality that had attracted him to her in the first place, a fierce independence that both challenged and complemented his own nature. 6 months after their encounter at the fundraiser, Ethan found himself once again in Brooklyn, this time attending a neighborhood business showcase organized by the community center. He told himself he was there to evaluate the impact of his donations, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. He wanted to see Claire. She was at the center of the event, confidently directing volunteers and engaging with small business owners. The exhausted woman he had glimpsed at the fundraiser had been replaced by someone vibrant and purposeful. Her clothes were still modest compared to what she had worn during their marriage, but she carried herself with renewed confidence. Ethan kept to the periphery, observing without approaching. He had not planned to speak with her, content to maintain his role as shadow benefactor. But fate had other ideas. "Hiding in plain sight, Mr. Rhodes?" Claire's voice came from behind him, causing him to turn sharply. She stood with arms crossed, an unreadable expression on her face. "Ms. Winters," he acknowledged, surprised by her direct approach. "Not hiding. Observing. This is an impressive event." "Thank you." Though I suspect you've seen enough corporate events to last a lifetime, community showcases must seem rather pedestrian by comparison. On the contrary, he replied, finding his footing. I find authentic community engagement refreshing after the artifice of corporate functions. Claire studied him for a moment, then said, "Walk with me?" It wasn't really a question. They strolled through the showcase, maintaining a professional distance as Claire pointed out various local businesses. To anyone watching, they appeared to be nothing more than a potential donor and a development coordinator. But the tension between them was palpable. Finally, Claire led him to a quiet corner where they could speak privately. "I know what you've been doing, Ethan?" He could have feigned ignorance, but something in her direct gaze made pretense seem futile. "And what exactly do you think I've been doing?" The anonymous donation, the rent stabilization, the computer lab, the healthcare subsidy, the car repairs, the student loans. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't trace it all back to you? Ethan didn't immediately respond, weighing his options. Denial seemed pointless. Claire had always been too intelligent to fool with corporate smokescreens. "I saw you were struggling," he finally said. "I wanted to help." "Without asking if I wanted your help," she countered, "without respecting my choice to make my own way. Would you have accepted if I'd offered directly?" "That's not the point, Ethan, and you know it." "Then what is the point, Claire?" A hint of frustration crept into his voice. "That I should have watched you struggle when I had the means to help? That I should have respected your pride more than—" "Your well-being?" Claire's eyes flashed. "The point is that nothing has changed. You still think throwing money at problems is the same as solving them. You still don't understand that sometimes people need something different than what you think they need." "And what did you need, Claire?" His voice softened, genuinely curious. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked away, collecting her thoughts before meeting his gaze again. "I needed to find my own way, to know that I could rebuild my life on my terms. And yes, I've used your help. I'm not too proud to admit that. But it should have been my choice to accept it, not your unilateral decision to provide it." Ethan felt a familiar frustration rising, the same fundamental disconnect that had plagued their marriage. "I saw a problem and I fixed it. That's what I do, Claire. That's who I am." "I know," she said, and there was a surprising gentleness in her tone. "That's always been who you are, the fixer, the provider, the man who moves mountains with a phone call. I never wanted you to be someone different, Ethan. I just wanted to be your partner, not your project." Her words struck him with unexpected force. For the first time, he glimpsed their failed marriage from her perspective. Not as a series of problems he had failed to solve, but as a partnership he had failed to nurture. "I never saw you as a project," he said quietly. "Didn't you? Be honest." "Ethan, when you saw me at the fundraiser, what did you see? A problem to be fixed, a situation to be managed. You didn't ask what I wanted or needed. You just implemented solutions." Ethan couldn't deny the truth in her words. His instinct had been to fix her circumstances, not to understand them. It was the same instinct that had driven him throughout their marriage, seeing Claire's unhappiness as a problem to solve rather than an emotion to share. "You're right," he admitted, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "I should have asked." Claire's surprise at his admission was evident. In their marriage, Ethan Rhodes rarely acknowledged being wrong about anything. "Well," she said after a moment, "you can ask now." It was an opening, however small. "What do you need, Claire? What do you want?" She considered the question carefully. "I want to succeed on my own terms. I want to build something meaningful at the community center. And I want—" She hesitated. "I want you to stop hiding behind anonymous donations and shell companies if you're going to be in my life in any capacity." "And what capacity would that be?" The question held more vulnerability than he had intended to reveal. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Let's start with honesty and see where that leads. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was something that had been missing from their relationship for a long time. A genuine invitation to connect as equals. "I can do honesty," Ethan said, returning her smile with a tentative one of his own. Over the following months, Ethan and Claire established a new dynamic. Not quite friendship, but no longer the strained avoidance of the past 5 years. Ethan became an official donor to the community center, working directly with Claire on initiatives that matched his genuine interests in education and entrepreneurship. He still had resources she didn't, but for the first time, he asked rather than assumed what was needed. Claire, for her part, allowed herself to accept help when it made sense, without seeing it as a surrender of independence. Her side business flourished to the point where she was considering making it her full-time focus. The community center offered her a promotion to executive director when Harold announced his retirement, a testament to her effectiveness over the past year. Their professional collaboration gradually gave way to cautious personal reconnection. Coffee meetings to discuss center business extended into dinner conversations about their lives since the divorce. Ethan spoke of the emptiness of his achievements, without someone to share them. Claire admitted the toll that financial insecurity had taken on her sense of purpose. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraising gala that they had planned together, they found themselves walking along the Brooklyn waterfront. The Manhattan skyline glittered across the river, Ethan's office building prominently among them. "Do you miss it?" he asked, nodding toward the lights. "The lifestyle, I mean." Claire considered the question honestly. "Parts of it. I don't miss the social obligations or the constant scrutiny, but I miss the security sometimes, the freedom to focus on what matters without worrying about making rent." She glanced at him. "What about you? Do you miss being married?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Not the arguments or the growing distance, but the partnership, when it was good. Having someone who wasn't impressed by what I had but cared about who I was." They stopped walking, turning to face each other. In the glow of the city lights, Claire could see vulnerability in Ethan's expression that she had rarely witnessed during their marriage. "We're different people now," she said, softly. "Better people, I hope," he replied. "At least I'm trying to be." "So am I." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions about second chances and lessons learned. Finally, Ethan took a breath and said, "I have something to confess." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Another secret good deed I haven't discovered yet?" "No, something else." He looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "The day we met at the fundraiser wasn't a coincidence. I knew you were working there. I had been keeping track of you rather than the anger he expected." Claire laughed. "I know, Ethan. Your investigator isn't as discreet as you think. Mrs. Patterson across the hall mentioned a nice man asking questions months ago." Ethan looked genuinely chagrined. "I should have known you'd figure it out. You always were several steps ahead of me." "Not always," she said, her expression growing more serious. "But I've learned a lot since we were married. About what I need, what I want, about the difference between independence and isolation." "And what do you want now?" Ethan asked, echoing the question she had posed to him months earlier. Claire studied him thoughtfully. "I want to see if this new dynamic between us is real or just a temporary correction. I want to know if we've truly learned from our mistakes, or if we're just better at hiding them. And I want—" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I want to know if there's still something worth rebuilding here." Ethan reached for her hand, a question in the gesture. When she didn't pull away, he entwined his fingers with hers. "I'd like to find out," he said simply. As they stood together, looking out at the city that had witnessed both their union and their separation, neither made promises or declarations. They had both learned the hard way that words came easily. It was actions that revealed truth over time. But in that moment, with their hands linked and the past acknowledged but not dictating their future, they found something that had eluded them during their marriage. A balance between his instinct to provide and her need for partnership, between his resources and her independence, between helping and controlling. It wasn't a fairy tale ending with guaranteed happiness. It was something more valuable, an honest beginning with eyes wide open to both possibilities and pitfalls. Whether this new connection would lead to reconciliation or simply a healthier closure remained to be seen. But for the first time, in 5 years, both Ethan and Claire were willing to find out, one honest conversation at a time. Hey viewers, if you enjoyed this story about Ethan and Claire finding their way back to understanding each other, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more heartwarming stories like this one. Drop a comment below telling me your favorite part. Was it when Claire confronted Ethan about his secret help? Or perhaps that tender moment on the Brooklyn waterfront? Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more stories that touch your heart.